Excellency, Archbishop of Malta, Honorable Minister, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It was a cold and stormy night 3 decades ago. Malta had rarely seen a storm like it. Yet, it was the setting where one of the greatest political decisions of humankind was taken. It was here. It was then that the Cold War was officially declared over. It was against this background of high and mighty waves crushing against these shores that two hands shook in what has been described as the most important meeting between the two superpowers at the time since the 1945 Yalta Conference. Welcome to the commemoration of the 30th anniversary of the Bush-Gorbachev summit that took place here, just outside this beautiful bay, on the 2nd and 3rd of December in 1989. Let us recall what led to it and what happened on this historic day.
For almost 30 long years, it was the most visible sign of the bitter division between East and West. 3 decades until the wall fell on November the 9th, 1989. It was the beginning of the end of the so-called Cold War.
You had competition between two superpowers, the United States of America and the Soviet Union at the time. And continuously, these two superpowers created what was called a patron-client system. They essentially had alliances with states around the world in order to advance their interests literally on a global basis. This is what makes the Cold War so phenomenal.
Two men were at the heart of ending this ongoing political rivalry: Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev and the President of the United States of America, George Bush. Two weeks before the unexpected fall of the Berlin Wall, Malta's then Prime Minister, Edi Fenekadami, received a very unexpected request.
I do remember that I was this normal day at my office. I was Prime Minister at Castile, and I received a phone call from the ambassador of the Soviet Union in Malta. And he told me that he wanted to see me urgently in the company of the ambassador of the United States of America. And they came together. The first thing they said, we're here on behalf of our presidents who have asked us to see you and to put a question to you. And the question was, would Malta host a meeting between President Gorbachev and President Bush in Malta? My immediate reply was, with open arms.
History, like time, does not stand still. And in this case, it had turned full circle.
President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill met here in Valletta on their way to Yalta to meet Stalin. Here they shared notes for a meeting that would basically split Europe in the way that then gave rise to the Cold War.
The Cold War started in Yalta in 1945, and it was going to end in Malta in 89. Formally, an epoch was coming to an end.
It took time to fix a venue for the meeting, but the two most powerful men in the world at that time agreed to meet in the Mediterranean, just off the coast of Malta.
Our neutrality has actually made Malta a place which can be trusted, an honest broker, as they call it in the system, where it seeks peace and stability.
Ekkuma, signori, il-wasla ta' Mikhail Gorbachev.
It is a recognition by the two biggest powers in the world in those days, and a recognition of our neutrality, especially the fact that neither the Americans nor the Soviets in the height of the Cold War had any time for our neutrality.
President Bush and myself have decided to meet here earlier than the planned visit of the Soviet president to the United States, because we believe that recent developments call for more dynamic dialogue between our countries and our peoples.
The Malta Summit convened on December 2nd and 3rd, 1989, on board Maxim Gorky, a civilian Soviet cruise ship which anchored in the harbor at Marsashlok.
The most important context is the bad weather which struck Malta. Part of the fact that Malta was always known for having sunny winters.
The tempest we had was extraordinary. The extent to which the leaders still met, I think, is indicative of, without exaggerating, of course, the extent to which the weather was also reflecting this monumental development.
As the Mediterranean Sea was whipped up by winds and rain, Bush and Gorbachev calmly discussed a peaceful future.
As I leave Malta for Brussels and a meeting with our NATO allies, I am optimistic that as the West works patiently together and increasingly cooperates with the Soviet Union, we can realize a lasting peace and transform the East-West relationship to one of enduring cooperation. And that is a future that's worthy of our peoples, and that's the future that I want to help in creating, and that's the future that Chairman Gorbachev and I began right here in Malta. Thank you, sir, for your hospitality.
Although no official agreement was signed, the summit provided a rare opportunity in which the two leaders discussed the radical changes that Europe and the world were experiencing. In spite of the differences, historians argue that the most important result of the Malta summit was the cooperative dialogue Bush and Gorbachev had established.
The two presidents, I think, gained a lot of self-confidence and confidence in each other. And from that moment on, it was clear that the world has changed and that Malta had played a part in it.
That was an extraordinary moment in the history of the world.
The Malta Summit is a historic moment because it actually created a complete transformation of the international system, which resulted in the Cold War no longer continuing.
It was a moment for Malta to sell itself internationally as a place for dialogue.
Not surprisingly, perhaps, that the Malta Summit is widely considered as the symbolic end of the 20th century longest international struggle.
The 1989 summit ended that Cold War in an era where we are once again faced with a situation of more walls, more wars, more tensions between countries. I think it is very apt to remember the joy we all felt when those tensions, those walls, fell down at the end of the 80s.
Malta was and remains a safe and peaceful place where people of different cultures, backgrounds meet and come together. Located right in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, we have had several millennia of training on the job. To give a musical interpretation of this national trait, the Malta Philharmonic Orchestra will now execute a piece composed for this occasion by Maestro Aurelio Belli. It is entitled, Malta, You Are Here. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you a man who was one of the closest to President Gorbachev during the Malta summit. Please help me welcome Mr. Pavel Palashenko, former Soviet minister, counselor, and chief interpreter of the President of the Soviet Union, currently head of communications at the Gorbachev Foundation. Mr. Pavel Palashenko.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to speak here at this commemoration of the historic Malta Summit. It was, of course, an even greater honor and privilege to participate in it 30 years ago. Let me begin by saying that I do not agree with the famous phrase that living in interesting times is a curse. But living in historic times is certainly not easy. It is like being on a plane going through severe turbulence. The two co-pilots of that plane were Mikhail Gorbachev and George Bush. I vividly recall the first substantive conversation in Washington, their first substantive conversation in Washington during the final moments of Mikhail Gorbachev's visit in December 1987, the visit that culminated in the signing of the first nuclear disarmament agreement, the INF Treaty, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Treaty. George Bush, then Vice President of the United States, accompanied Mikhail Gorbachev in the Soviet limousine to the airport, about a 30-minute ride from Midtown, Washington. I was with them. I translated that historic conversation, which Mikhail Gorbachev later asked me to transcribe from memory. And I remember it vividly still. The two leaders, Bush and Gorbachev, were both enthusiastic about the results of the summit and about the prospects for US-Soviet cooperation. It was the beginning of the end of the Cold War. A few months later in Moscow, replying to a question from an American reporter, Ronald Reagan said that he no longer regarded the Soviet Union as an evil empire. He said it was another time, another era. What Bush and Gorbachev said to each other in that limousine amounted to a pledge to continue and build on what had been achieved during the Gorbachev-Reagan years. Yet I do not think that either of them could have predicted the kind of global turbulence that they would have to navigate 2 years later. The stormy weather they both encountered in Malta was the mirror image of the gathering storm clouds over Europe, the Middle East, and beyond. The morning of the first day of the summit, it became clear that it would be impossible for the two leaders to convene on the Navy ships as proposed by President Bush and as previously planned. I heard the commander of the Soviet Navy, Admiral Chernovin, say to Gorbachev, "Mikhail Sergeyevich, I talked to the officers and the sailors. They would be proud to welcome you and the president to their ships, and they're sorry that it is impossible. But your safety is paramount." So it was on the civilian ship Maxim Gorky that the two men and their delegations discussed international security, not their own safety, but the safety of the world. The records of the Malta talks have by now been published. Those records and the voluminous historical literature are testimony of the times they reflect. It was a time when people mattered, a time when values mattered, when ideas mattered. If only for that reason, the talks in Malta and afterwards could not be easy. But there was one thing that was more important than what is called the issues. The two sides wanted to be clear about each other's intentions. Would the Soviet Union use force to stem the revolutionary tide in Eastern Europe? Would the United States exploit the turmoil to weaken the security of the Soviet Union and the political position of Mikhail Gorbachev? No playwright could have written a drama that would be richer in text and subtext. That was real life, not literature. Who could have predicted the vertiginous pace of German unification? Who could have predicted what happened a few months later in August 1990 when, during the talks in Irkutsk between Edward Shevardnadze and James Baker, an aide entered the room with a note for James Baker, which he read, quote, "The Iraqi troops have crossed the Kuwait border." There were moments in 1990 and in 1991 when it would have been easy to step on a slippery slope back to confrontation or even conflagration. It didn't happen. For that, we have to be grateful to Mikhail Gorbachev and George Bush and those who supported them, including the First Ladies. The Malta Summit and the sequence of events that followed are a lesson in responsibility and morality, a lesson that sometimes seems not to have been learned. But it is here for all to see, and a reminder it is here as we commemorate the 30th anniversary of Malta. Thank you.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is truly an honor to introduce the next speaker. Former President Mikhail Gorbachev himself. Mr. Gorbachev really wanted to come to Malta for this event, but it was not possible. Therefore, he has sent us a video message especially for this evening's event. Here it is.
Уважаемый господин премьер-министр, уважаемые жители Мальты, уважаемые участники торжественной церемонии, я признателен за приглашение выступить на вашем собрании. К сожалению, не могу присутствовать лично, но считаю очень важной возможность поделиться с вами чувствами и мыслями, которые я испытываю в связи с 30-летием важнейшего события – встречи руководителей Советского Союза и Соединенных Штатов Америки. Прежде всего хочу поблагодарить Мальту. Ваш остров стал местом, где подвязла черта под холодной войной. Правда, вы не смогли обеспечить для участников саммита безоблачную погоду, но и это, как оказалось, к лучшему. Шторм, разразившийся в ночь перед встречей, заставил нас с президентом Бушем изменить первоначальные планы. Вместо военных кораблей, местом проведения встречи стал сугубо гражданский теплоход «Максим Горький». Это было символично. Казалось, что кто-то сверху, может быть, сам Бог, диктовал мирные условия проведения этой встречи. Мы вели переговоры с президентом в момент, когда во всем мире, и особенно в странах Центральной и Восточной Европы, все более быстрыми темпами происходили глубокие перемены. Им дала мощный импульс перестройка в Советском Союзе. Стремительные перемены всегда испытания для политиков, лидеров государств. Они проходят проверку на дальновидность, выдержку и ответственность. В такие моменты необходимо посмотреть друг другу в глаза. Для этого мы встретились с президентом Джорджем Бушем. Мы знали друг друга. У нас До этого были важные встречи и обсуждения. Я надеялся, что президент понимает, как много поставлено на карту в этот момент. И мои ожидания оправдались. В нашей первой беседе президент Буш сказал: мы заинтересованы в успехе проводимых в Советском Союзе реформ. Общественное мнение в шаг поддерживает вас, решительно поддерживает перестройку. Это были важные слова. В ответ я сказал президенту Соединенных Штатов Америки: наши страны просто обречены взаимодействию на сотрудничество. Но для этого надо избавиться от взгляда друг на друга, как на врагов. Мы готовы больше не рассматривать шаг как врага и публично заявить об этом. И тут Джордж Буш встал и протянул мне через стол руку. В зал, где проходили переговоры, пригласили фотографов, которые зафиксировали этот момент. Две державы, которые на протяжении десятилетий держали весь мир в напряжении, отказались считать друг друга противниками. В течение 2 дней мы обсудили всю мировую повестку дня, все вопросы наших отношений, стратегическое вооружение, двустороннее экономическое сотрудничество, региональные конфликты, глобальный экологический кризис. Он ощущался уже тогда. Все это в контексте взаимодействия и сотрудничества. Договорились о том, что обе наши страны будут проявлять сдержанность и ответственный подход к событиям в Центральной и Восточной Европе. Сделан важный шаг к взаимному доверию, и заявили об этом на совместной пресс-конференции руководителей СССР и США. Саммит на Мальте, водораздел, рубеж новых отношений между нашими странами. Отношений, которые в следующем 1990 году прошли проверку на прочность и выдержали ее. Дух Мальты помог нам наладить взаимодействие и избежать кризиса, когда процесс объединения Германии и перемен в Восточной Европе еще более ускорился. И когда иракские войска захватили Кувейт, впервые за многие годы СССР и США действовали не в духе глобальной конфронтации, не в логике холодной войны. Возникла перспектива партнерских отношений, в сотрудничестве со всем международным сообществом государств. Мы хотели построить новый мировой порядок по замечательной формулировке Папы Римского Иоанна Павла II. Более безопасной, более справедливой и более гуманной. К сожалению, сегодня мы еще далеки от решения этой задачи. Миру угрожает перспектива новой гонки вооружений. Новая холодная война. Мировые лидеры не смогли выстроить новую надежную архитектуру безопасности, механизмы предотвращения и урегулирования конфликтов. Милитаризация политики и мышления подрывает доверие в отношениях между государствами. С этим ни в коем случае нельзя мириться. Необходимо действовать, чтобы возродить дух сотрудничества. Я призываю всех мировых лидеров к диалогу во имя будущего взаимодействия в духе Рейкьявика и Мальты.
For the benefit of us here who are not able to see the subtitles, I would now like to invite once again Mr. Palashenko to give us a summary of the main points of what former President Gorbachev said in the video. Thank you.
So back to my old job. Ladies and gentlemen, the most important points were, he said, first of all, I would like to thank Malta. Even though Malta was not able to provide good weather for the participants in the summit, Malta was the place where the final line was drawn under the Cold War. He said it was very important for both of us, President Bush and I, to look each other in the eye and to understand our intentions and how we would be acting in the situation that was developing. And that as a result of these negotiations at Malta, they were able to discuss all the issues on the agenda, including strategic weapons, regional issues, bilateral relations, environmental crisis, which was visible even then, and all the other issues. And the result of this summit was that trust emerged between the two powers, and that enabled them to act wisely in a situation that emerged afterwards with the crises in Europe and in the Middle East. For the first time, the two great powers that had kept the world in a state of stress during the Cold War were no longer acting in the spirit of confrontation and in the logic of the Cold War. And finally, President Gorbachev said, we started together with the entire international community to build a new world order, a world order that, in the famous words of Pope John Paul II, would be more stable, more just, and more humane, but we're still far from that goal. We're far from that goal, and therefore the world leaders need to resume dialogue, and they need to cooperate in the spirit of Malta. So that was the main points of President Gorbachev's address. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now it is time to introduce another gentleman who is gracing us with his participation. Dr. William Hopkins, a former high-level American conference interpreter.
That particular summit, we were aware of the fact that President Bush had been rather adamant publicly about the fact that there was no set agenda in terms of items. They apparently were going to be talking about various things. So as interpreters, of course, that made it a little bit more difficult for us because we had to try and prepare for every kind of eventuality. And we had a day. We arrived a day in advance of the meeting, so we had a whole day to study. The whole scenario had changed overnight because of the terrible weather conditions and the wind. So it turned out that we were going to have all of the meetings on the Soviet cruise liner that was moored in the harbor, and that there weren't going to be any meetings out on the water, out on those respective naval vessels. So, you know, I was relieved in a way, and as I was walking across the gangplank to get on to the Maxim Gorky, I was thinking to myself, these people are never going to know how lucky they are that they didn't have to climb up that rope ladder. Anyhow, when I got into we came into the setting. The Soviets were very hospitable, very cordial hosts. And, you know, there was some kind of atmosphere, I think maybe because everything had sort of been improvised somehow, but it was kind of, I would say, a little bit festive even. You know, everybody seemed in a pretty good mood, and I think all the principals and all the delegations felt kind of like they were a little bit awestruck by what had happened, the way things had gone, and they were slightly bemused that all of this had happened. And I think they kind of took a sort of jocular attitude towards it, and I think that they were just, you know, kind of really sort of fascinated with the way everything was turning out. I've never seen him so relaxed as he seemed to be at that meeting. And Mikhail Sergeyevich, you know, people noticed a lot of things about him, but I don't know how many people always noticed that he had this kind of mischievous twinkle in his eye. And he was nonetheless always very decorous and very courtly. But I noticed that he was very relaxed as well, and that twinkle was still in his eye. And those two men, I thought when they were sitting there so relaxed and kind of snuggled into that banquette, just seemed to have suddenly a lot more humane kind of disposition towards each other. Somehow there seemed to be a more humane kind of disposition towards the positions of the other side. And in general, it was just really very kind of edifying to feel that one was able to kind of help facilitate communication between these people. However, I will say that, this situation, what happened there, certainly pointed out to everybody that, we were all in this kind of common human situation, and that the only thing that was going to, if we wanted as human beings not to be vanquished, if we wanted not just to survive, but if we wanted to triumph as human beings, it was going to be necessary to do all of the things that those respective staffs had done the night before to get ready for this improvisational meeting that they managed to put together so very quickly. People had to manifest creative imagination and the willingness to innovate and a willingness to compromise and a willingness to cooperate. And I think in a certain respect that everybody kind of realized that somehow in their heart of hearts. And I think that the upshot of that whole meeting was that on some level, every participant realized that. And it was really very uplifting and really, really very positive. And I thought in that respect, very enjoyable. I'd just like to say that it's been my pleasure to share some of these recollections with you, some of my takeaways from that experience. And I'd like to wish the populace of Malta a very happy upcoming holiday season. And I'd like to express the hope that in the future, Malta, wonderful, exciting, unexpected, beautiful Malta, will continue to have the opportunity to provide such an historic and symbolic kind of venue for various of our players in this human drama to continue their work towards making a better future for mankind. Grazie.
Earlier on, we heard Mikhail Gorbachev speak today about the 1989 summit. Alas, we could not do the same with George Bush, who unfortunately is no longer with us. But we are honored to bring you the next best thing. Here are his words during the joint press conference aboard the Maxim Gorky, not so far away from here, 30 years ago.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, President Gorbachev has graciously suggested I go first, and I don't think anyone can say that the saltwater get-together was anything other than adventure, at least out in the harbor here. First, I want to thank Prime Minister Adame and the people of Malta and others for their warm and gracious hospitality. I want to thank the captain and crew of Belknap for the great support that they've given us. I think they were wondering if I was about to become a permanent guest. And a special thanks to the captain and crew of Gorky for their hospitality. And also thanks to the captain and crew of Slava, who have been so hospitable to many on the American side. I first approached Chairman Gorbachev about an informal meeting of this kind after my trip to Europe last July. Amazing changes that I witnessed in Poland and in Hungary, hopeful changes, led me to believe that it was time to sit down with Chairman Gorbachev face to face to see what he and I could do to seize the opportunities before us to move this relationship forward. He agreed with that concept of a meeting. And so we got rapid agreement, and I think that the extraordinary developments in Europe since the time that the meeting was proposed only reinforce the importance of our getting together. And so I'm especially glad we had this meeting. And we did gain a deeper understanding of each other's views. We set the stage for progress across a broad range of issues. And while it is not for the United States and the Soviet Union to design the future for Europeans or for any other people, I am convinced that a cooperative U.S.-Soviet relationship can indeed make the future safer and brighter. And there is virtually no problem in the world, and certainly no problem in Europe, that improvement in the U.S.-Soviet relationship will not help to ameliorate. A better U.S.-Soviet relationship is to be valued in and of itself, but it also should be an instrument of positive change for the world. For 40 years, the Western Alliance has stood together in the cause of freedom, and now with reform underway in the Soviet Union, we stand at the threshold of a brand new era of U.S.-Soviet relations. And it is within our grasp to contribute, each in our own way, to overcoming the division of Europe and ending the military confrontation there. We've got to do more to ameliorate the violence and suffering that afflicts so many regions in the world and to remove common threats to our future. The deterioration of the environment, the spread of nuclear and chemical weapons, ballistic missile technology, the narcotics trade, and our discussions here will give greater impetus to make real progress in these areas. There's also a great potential to develop common opportunities. For example, the Soviet Union now seeks greater engagement with the international market economy, a step that certainly I'm prepared to encourage in every way I can. As I leave Malta for Brussels in a meeting with our NATO allies, I am optimistic that as the West works patiently together and increasingly cooperates with the Soviet Union, we can realize a lasting peace and transform the East-West relationship to one of enduring cooperation. And that is a future that's worthy of our peoples, and that's the future that I want to help in creating, and that's the future that Chairman Gorbachev and I began right here in Malta. Thank you, sir, for your hospitality.
Russia and the United States of America have bequeathed onto the world a culture, actually a wealth of artistic and cultural legacies. So tonight we would like to celebrate their respective contribution to music, along with a few snippets of our homegrown melodies. Maestro Aurelio Belli has weaved a piece of Maltese lace from some of the most famous Russian and American compositions, which I am sure you are all familiar with. Let us enjoy, ladies and gentlemen, the Malta Philharmonic Orchestra. Thank you very much, Maestro Aurelio Belli and the Malta Philharmonic Orchestra. Thank you. And to conclude the evening, I would now like to invite Honorable Carmelo Abela, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade Promotion, to share his thoughts on this occasion. Honorable.
Your Grace, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Our shores rarely manifested seemingly indomitable forces. But in the beginning of December 1989, Malta experienced the harshest weather that we could recall for years. However, the raging seas did not dishearten people of goodwill. It did not stand in the way of their determination to herald the beginning of a new era. The storm provided something of an analogy of the rush of events that would take European and world history onto a new trajectory. Those gale forces of 30 years ago personify the determination of two men who changed the world of their time, then US President George H.W. Bush and Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev. Dwelling on this weather metaphor, permit me to momentarily depart from the summit theme to make a reference to the political disturbances that our country has been facing over the past few days. As you are aware, a person was formally accused of being the mastermind behind the brutal murder of Daphne Caruana Galizia. We are witnessing the rule of law in action in a country with strong, functioning institutions, a country where no one, and I repeat, no one is above the law. As our Prime Minister said in his televised address to the nation yesterday, the feeling of genuine sadness and anger for this murder are justified. Nevertheless, disorder incited by a few who see such protests as ideal opportunities to harass or attack those who do not share their point of view are unjustified in a democracy. We look forward to this dark chapter in our country's history to be concluded as soon as possible as justice is served. Quoting the statement issued by the President of Malta yesterday, we are passing through difficult times, but if we keep our calm and stay united, we will emerge from this with the least damage possible to Maltese society and to our country. At present, Malta is doing the rounds on the international press for all the wrong reasons. This is not the Malta that I know. This does not represent who we really are. I am more than aware of the challenge ahead of us to restore Malta's image. I am determined to do my utmost in this regard. We are confident that it is only a matter of time till our ship is once again steered to calmer waters. Our strong commitment is to dedicate our full attention and resources to the creation of a better present and future for our citizens while contributing to the common good internationally. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, back to the Bush-Gorbachev summit, just a few weeks after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Malta closely witnessed this newfound hope and made it its own. we embraced the vision of a world which is more just, safer, and where differences and issues are rather discussed at a table. And together, with the rest of the world, we rejoiced. We are very proud today to stand here to commemorate what was achieved in Malta. The late President George H.W. Bush, 41st President of the United States, said, and I quote, "We can realize a lasting peace and transform the East-West relationship to one of enduring cooperation. That is the future that Chairman Gorbachev and I began right here in Malta," unquote. Originally intended as an interim meeting to prepare for a full-scale summit the following year, what came to be referred to as the C6 summit in Malta would take on a life of its own, symbolically declaring the Cold War over. Malta is privileged to have played such a role in this momentous episode. As stated by former Soviet Union leader Mikhail Gorbachev, and I quote, "The Malta Summit in 1989 was so important that if it had not taken place, the world out there would be unrecognizable to the one in which we live today," unquote. The decision to host this historic event here in Malta was symbolic, not only because of our country's geostrategic position at the very heart of the Mediterranean, but also due to Malta's policy of neutrality. Malta has for decades cemented its vocation as a neutral country in the pursuit of peace and prosperity through dialogue and diplomacy. This country has sought to serve as a bridge builder between East and West, North and South. Throughout our long history, we have always been at the center of rising empires and civilization in this part of the world. All these historical interactions, spanning thousands of years, have led Malta to be a natural harbor connecting ideas, continents, and civilizations. Malta retains its Euro-Mediterranean vocation as a centerpiece of its international relations. As a member of the European Union, we will continue to ensure that peace and security remain the main focus of international relations. Furthermore, as Malta's election to a non-permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council for the years 2023-2024 approaches, we shall remain focused on promoting the UN Charter's principles of peace and security, upon which we seek to build our actions should we be given the honor to serve the international community of nations on the Council. The 1989 meeting in Malta provided the possibility for the birth of a historic expansion of democracies and open markets, a wave of globalization that created the greatest prosperity and largest global middle class the world have ever seen, and the enlargement of the European Union, deepening ties among the world's leading democracies. Arguably, the European project has safely secured peace in the European continent for over 70 years through the building of an architecture based on interregional and multilateral cooperation. It was also a time for multilateral action, seeing the creation of the World Trade Organization and the widening of the membership of other organizations, including the Council of Europe and the United Nations. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, notwithstanding the optimism emerging from the end of the Cold War, the world we live in today is very different to that one would have imagined 30 years ago. Poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, terrorism, forced displacement, and the rise of nationalism are all issues that need to be addressed collectively. These challenges are of a global nature, and a strong and unified multilateral approach remains the only way forward. We must cherish and learn from our past to shape a better future. Discussions on security at the regional and international level are increasingly widening to encompass elements not traditionally associated with the remits of diplomacy and foreign affairs. There now seems to be an emerging consensus that addressing the well-being of youth, intercultural dialogue, education, as well as interfaith dialogue are also crucial elements that need to feature prominently in security-related discussions. The technological advances registered over the last 2 decades greatly contributed towards an intricate globalized world. The world has also become exposed to new and innumerable opportunities. Barriers must be brought down, and mistrust should be replaced by dialogue and cooperation, investing in confidence-building measures for a two-way street in which all sides are fully and equally committed and willing to listen, understand, and learn from one another. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, in a deep spirit of friendship and dialogue, let us commemorate the 30th anniversary of the 1989 Malta Summit, a pivotal episode in history that should serve as a stark reminder that together the international community can reach out for the collective good of humanity. We all profess to be aiming at the same ultimate objectives of stability, security, and prosperity at the national, regional, and international levels. It remains our imperative duty and responsibility to act proactively and to secure a better world for generations yet to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. For those who wish to see the videos that we presented tonight, I would like to tell you that they are uploaded on the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us this evening. We would now cordially like to invite you to a reception which is being held just outside this tent. Have a lovely evening. Good night.